So when we're talking about recall, right, it really comes down to motivational math, right? So we say, why does a dog do anything? Is of course always to better its situation, right? And so, if you imagine that this is the dog and there's something over here that the dog wants, and there's you here, right? And while you have something that the dog wants, and you can imagine a scale of 1 to 10, right? And what you have over here is a 4 out of 10 to the dog, all right? And the squirrel over here that's running away is to that dog an 8 out of 10, right? You have no recall. Because when you're doing motivational math, right, the dog goes, well, this over here is higher value than this. So in order to just be doing what I want, why does a dog do anything? Better its own situation. It betters its situation by going that way, right? And so we don't have a recall. And that's why, that's kind of the formula for why people say, oh, like my recall's great, right? Because their 4 out of 10 works fine when there's nothing else around, or when, whatever's over here is a 1 out of 10, their 4 out of 10 is plenty and the dog comes back, right? And then we say, people say, oh, it's prey and it's all that sort of stuff and you can't call off prey. And that's not true. It's just that it's very much more interesting. Of course, the dog can be trained to find more value in something else. So our goal as a trainer then is to decide, what is my path to changing this motivational math around, right? Now, we can devalue the squirrel that's our 8, or we can up the value of what we have. And my goal usually is to do both, right? So what I want to do is increase the value of the perceived value of how I can pay my dog for having recalled, right? Why would a dog come back to us is to find value in doing it. So like if you're training with food, as an example, by jackpotting larger amounts of food, maybe by the way you deliver the food, in the game type play, whether you're then going to call the dog back and it's a reward event that you can maximize. And there's lots and lots of different ways you could do that. You want to up the value of it. But in some cases, especially if the dog has in the past, say if it is the squirrel, the dog has caught the squirrel, all right, and engaged and actually, there's going to be very little that you can manufacture that will be as good as that. So normally with most dogs, we can get this motivational math correct with a lot of positive reinforcement back to us, where the dog finds the maximum value by coming back to us, and there isn't anything else out there that's higher, like so much higher value. And if we've been focusing on that from a puppy, then we can usually get away with that, right? What I want to do then is I've got to find a way when that doesn't work, when the motivational math doesn't add up, because we see this a lot with cats. Once a dog has chased and caught a cat, and especially if they've killed it, that is a highly reinforcing thing that's not going away without some sort of intervention of that, right? I doubt that anything we're able to provide, unless we're carrying another cat back here and we can throw that out, right? Anything we're able to provide is going to be as highly reinforcing. So we tend to try and deal in the inevitable, right? And what we show the dog is, I show the dog is that while you're chasing this thing, so I've maximized my value here, and imagine I could get that to say a 7, right? But it still doesn't add up because my dog wants to go for that 8. We show the dog, while you're chasing that, you won't get it. You won't have the fun that you think you're going to have. And it's inevitable that when I call you, you are coming back, right? So that's the function of a long line, and we call the dog, and even though the dog's ignoring us, right, like the dog's still desperately trying to chase there, we drag the dog back, hand over hand if we have to, bring him back in on his flat collar, and we go, here's your crappy 7 out of 10 that you never wanted, and we offer it to the dog. And in most cases, if it's food or something, they might take it if they're not completely locked in prey. But then that's kind of not the real reinforcer. That's this sort of job that the dog has to do of taking that reinforcer, that reward, But the real reinforce that is we then let them go back to what they were wanting to do anyway, if it's safe to do that. So if it's just chasing a squirrel around and you're happy to do that because you're happy that the squirrel will get away and that it's, it's a controlled environment, safe to do that. This is something I do very much with my own dog with birds, right? And so I say, you have to come back to me. It's inevitable. I'll show you, you have to. Whether I have to hand over hand drag you, I don't care. You are coming back. You're not in trouble. It is going to happen. Here's the presentation of your reward, which you probably don't find very reinforcing. But then your real reinforcer is you get to go back to what you were doing. So what the idea is that the dog learns, it's inevitable. When the boss says the recall command, I'm going back regardless. And what you can find, just using that techniques, and at this stage we're really using no tools other than a long line and a flat collar, we can show the dog that it's inevitable. I will force you back. You will take this piece of food and then you can go back to it. So the dog's like, let's just get this over with, right? And the dog turns on a dime and comes running back and says, okay, I'll come to you so that I can go back to get to chase the squirrel, right? And on the day where that's a problem and you need the dog to stay with you and your dog can't chase it, that's the day where you break the rules on the dog and you clip the dog up and you don't let them go back, right? So the dog then assumes, when I'm chasing something, the moment you call me, it's impossible to get to it. I have to come back to you, take what you have, then get to go out. And the day when there's a road in between the dog and that reinforcer, he comes back to you expecting you to then release, and then you clip him up and go, actually, not today, right? And, for a long time I thought that would damage what we do, but it doesn't really, because it puts the dog on a variable reinforcement schedule, which is likely to strengthen the behavior anyway. Now, that typically works with a lot of dogs. The issue can be then that the dog figures out, especially if there's been sort of a negative issue, like a history with the leash, where the dog sort of shuts down on the leash and the dog sort of says, when I'm on the leash, I'm never allowed to sort of explore and do the things that I want. And so they don't display the behavior. People then will report that the dog, even though this 8 out of 10 is here and I've only got the 7 out of 10, when my dog's on the leash, he doesn't even try going for the 8 because he knows he's not going to get to it. And that can be a history. We can accidentally confirm that for the dog over the years before we get to training this. So it's really difficult to create this situation, because when the leash is on, the dog doesn't perform the behavior. And then when the leash comes off, we have no influence over the dog and we're back to square one. So what we've got to do, we're in this position. What we've got to do is artificially create something interesting out there, and we can change the numbers now, right? So when it was a squirrel, it was the 8 out of 10. And so you've maximized your 7 out of 10. What we want to do is set something up so that the dog reliably goes out to there. Now, it might be a bowl of food or it might be anything like that, but we want to create the situation. If you can just distract the dog and have someone out there, like if the dog will leave you as well and will just kind of wander by itself. But the idea is we want to create distance from the dog while it is on the line, all right? Then if we're going to use the e-collar, and the e-collar is a perfect tool to get to eventually get to off-leash 100% reliable recall, is that we then, while the dog is out there, with the e-collar at the lowest possible setting that the dog can perceive, and we'll speak about that in a minute, how to find that, we would for no reason turn the e-collar on, right? So the dog will feel it, but it's nowhere near a pain compliance. The dog isn't going to be worried about it. What I want is for that e-collar to be at a level where the dog actually would think, you know what, I can live under this amount of pressure. This is no big deal to me. It's not even at that point what we could refer to as negative reinforcement, because the dog's not compelled to do anything by it, but they notice it, all right? So what I want is for the dog to feel that. Then we give our recall command, right? Then we do the exact same thing. Whether the dog comes or not, we drag the dog in. And now, because we're playing in lower stakes environment, the dog's highly likely to going to want to come back, right? Because our recall should work at this point. The moment the dog commits to coming back to us, they turn to do so, we take off the pressure of the e-collar. So the timeline looks like that. The pressure goes on, right? Collar on, right? Command happens, right? Behavior happens, right? And that's making the decision to do the behavior, and that removes the collar, all right? The collar pressure. Then, so it's not that the e-collar needs to be on all the way back. It's just until you see that the dog has decided to come back. And then that's where some people go wrong, is that they want to wait for the dog to come all the way back and then they ask for a sit or a down or whatever. And they don't actually reinforce positively the recall. All they're doing is turning off the pressure when the dog begins to recall. But then when you ask for another behavior when the dog comes back, that's the behavior that gets reinforced. Now, of course, the whole chain is being reinforced, but the negative reinforcement, when it becomes that, is what's pressing the recall. And the positive reinforcement then for the sit in front of us or whatever. So the trick is that the moment the dog decides to come back, you can confirm that the dog is like going to do it. That's when you use your marker and you say yes, even though the dog is still out there. And that's a guarantee to the dog. All you have to do is come back and get this food, right? So don't ask for any extra behaviors when you come back. Then, like, we do that for enough repetitions that the dog begins to understand it. When the e-collar starts, you're about to give me a command, right? That command is going to be to turn around and come back. As soon as I commit to doing that, the e-collar turns off. And the dog is just noticing that, and we'll talk about the level in a moment. The dog is just noticing that, not compelled by the e-collar. And so this won't work when we go into our high stakes environment here. This won't work because the dog goes, I notice that it turns off, but I actually don't care about turning it off. What's really super important is that we don't rush to get into this high stakes environment, because if we do, say, 50 reps where like we show the dog very low level e-collar turns on, the minute you commit to coming back, it turns off, and then you get positive reinforcement when you come back, right? And we do that at a really low level, and we'll be in a low stakes environment able to do that perfectly, all right? If we go to the high stakes environment and the dog then says, I feel the e-collar, I hear you recall, I hear that your command, but I'm going after this, right? If the dog chases after the squirrel, and then at that point you go, well, the e-collar's not working, and we take the pressure off, the function that we've now taught the dog in a high stakes environment is that my recall means run away chasing the squirrel, and you turn off the pressure of the e-collar by chasing the squirrel. So once you decide, like, that's where the function of the long line is important, because once you decide I'm using that e-collar pressure, the behavior that turns off the pressure has to be what you want, especially in that high stakes environment, because otherwise you might double your dog's intent to catch the squirrel, right? You might accidentally double, like, yeah, catching the squirrel is fun, but I also turn off this e-collar when I do it, right? So you might double your problem. So what I want to do is sort of creep up the levels of the e-collar to the point where the dog thinks, hey, I do kind of want to avoid that, right? And we don't need to go to really high levels, but the dog needs to learn the only path to turning it off is by coming back to me, right? And he learns that that's what happens at a very low level. And then we can increase the level a little bit by showing him the same path to the point where he then says, okay, I do want to turn that off. One thing that's important for us to remember about the e-collar as well is that even the very lowest level, pressure is cumulative. So even at the very lowest level, that can become quite aversive to the dog if it's held on for a long period of time. So that's why I don't worry too much, but it's why I must use a long line, is that if I just find myself in this situation where the dog says, nah, I know you're calling me, I know you have something interesting for me, but I'm not interested today, and I know this e-collar's on, but I am still chasing that, that's where I really need to be on a long line so that I can say, no, you are coming back, and I'm going to keep this e-collar pressure on until you make the decision to do it. Even if you never make the decision, I'm going to drag you hand over hand until you come back. Then I'll remove the pressure. Then you can go chase the squirrel, all right? Because that's what I need the dog to learn, is that, like, it's inevitable. Once that recall command is given, the only way I can turn off the pressure, first via a long line and then later via the e-collar, is by coming back, doing what I'm told, right? And by following this technique, if you exclusively do it like this, you're going to end up with your e-collar being a recall command. Essentially, you'll be able to recall the dog with a low-level tap on the e-collar, and the dog will know that means come back. And you end up with that as the command for the behavior actually being the e-collar, all right? So how do we find that lowest possible level? It's level 1, right? So what happens is people always, they get their e-collar and they put it on and they say, my dog can't feel level 1. There's no indication of how he can feel level 1. Well, that's what we want, right? And across most brands, like I like Martin Systems as a brand. Garmin's great as well. The levels are very similar on them in that it's 18 levels. Ecolor Technologies, Dogtra, with those, you might be looking at, it might be level 1, 2, maybe 3, right? But I've pretty conclusively proven to people who are using Ecolor Technologies on a 40, thinking that's their working level, that their dog can feel level 1, right? And we assess that in the dog by doing a classical condition sort of thing. So we put the dog, there's lots of ways you can do it, but we want the dog in some sort of static position. We stim for no reason. We remove the stim, we wait 1 second, and then we give a marker to reinforce the dog. Now, whether that's a marker to come back to us or a marker to go get the reinforcer somewhere else, even if you could do this by feeding your dog. If your dog will hold a sit when you put the food bowl down, you can go stim and then say, now you can have your food. And what's going to happen in 8 to 12 repetitions later is you will see a change in behavior if your dog can feel the e-collar. And that change in behavior will not be an ear twitch and it will not be a display of stress. What it will be is the conditioned response that it's a release to the marker. So with some dogs, what you'll see is the dog actually will break the position and get the reinforcer. So if the dog's in a down and our marker is food and we're going to do it from us, right? So my dog's in a down and I go stim for no reason. I take it off, I wait 1 second, and then I click and the dog comes to me and takes food. Some dogs within 8 to 12 repetitions will actually, as soon as I stim, will go, I know for sure that leads to the click and food, therefore I'm just going to break the position and come to you. And that's fine. The more green, the less training a dog has, the more likely that is to happen. The more training a dog has, the more likely he is to hold the position for longer. But what you will see is some sort of anticipation. So what we often see is especially like a narrowing of the vision or licking of the lips or tightening of the facial expression because they know you're about to click, right? I feel that and you're about to click. So that's all you're looking for. You don't really need the break from position. All you need is the dog to show that anticipation. When you stim, he goes, I know that leads to something. That's about to be my reinforcer. So it's a really handy way of implementing it. There's lots of really specific ways to do it depending on the dog and the markers and reinforcers that you have, but everyone will figure out something that works for them, right? What you want is the dog static and then his marker so that and the e-collar then is a call to action. It means go and get your marker. And even that implementation of finding it that way for teaching it in this recall technique is going to be really helpful because you're essentially beginning the process. You're showing the dog that stim leads to reinforcement from me. I start on level 1. If I get to sort of 14 repetitions and the dog's still showing me nothing, like he's not showing any sign of feeling it, that's where I will go up 1 click and start again and say okay, can you feel it now? With a dog that's never felt the e-collar, I've never had an issue of them not feeling it within 8 to 12 repetitions, right? And not showing that. With a dog that has had previous use of the e-collar, even if it's low level use of the e-collar, we can't always be sure what the dog's interpretation of the function of low level stim is. So some people who imagine in the past, people will be told just fish around, it's bad advice, but they'd say just start at level 1, stim, and look for a reaction of the dog, right? Nothing happens, then they go up. Level 2 stim, look for a reaction of the dog. Level 3, look for a reaction of the dog. By the time you get to the ear twitch, you're getting dangerously close into aversive stim level, right? That's an involuntary muscle contraction. So you're getting pretty close to aversive stim. But the issue is in finding the level that way, you are teaching the dog that the low level stim means nothing, don't do anything about it. So you may find that if you have done that in the past, you may find that when you do this and the dog feels low level stim, he goes, that doesn't mean anything to me, right? And so if he's learnt that it means nothing to him, we're not classical conditioning doesn't work because we have to first desensitize, then counter condition. So our maths, our formula of 8 to 12 reps no longer applies because we have to first take away the function of it means nothing and then give it the function of it means something. So that's what I can't ever tell you specifically how many reps it's going to be for your dog if there's a history. If it's a blank slate green dog, never worn an e-collar before, it's going to happen with that 8 to 12, like at the most 12. And some really sharp dogs, like especially a lot of the Malinois that I like to work with, you see it in 3 reps. The dog's like, I felt that, and they narrow their vision and they stare at the reinforcer because they're anticipating. So that's really the path for finding the level. My advice on the e-collar is to be low level for longer than you think, right? Because the chances are the dog can feel it and you're just trying to teach it the function. And of course, the day will come, right? When you've done 100 repetitions off of this system, off of low level reinforcers that are out and the dog is all working, and you then either find yourself in a position where you have to use it for real, or you set up a position where there is a much higher value reinforcer there. That's the day where you have to kind of be prepared. Like, all right, I've put in the reps. I know the dog knows the function of this. And the dog then can say, the dog ignoring the e-collar at that point is the exact same thing as the dog ignoring the recall command. It's just a tactile command that the dog knows, right? But also, it's one that he can ignore, just like your voice, because it doesn't hurt him. It doesn't do anything. And just like your voice, you can yell, right? And so you see people who they say, Fido, come, and Fido usually does. And then one day they say, Fido, come. Fido says, fuck you, I'm not coming. And they go, Fido, come, right? And they up the level. And the dog, I know what that means, only now it has more intensity. By putting in the reps, we can then do that with the e-collar, right? So that's where we've increased the situation and increased the criteria, and we can go up 1 click on the e-collar and be very moderate in this, because, 1 click can have a big effect. And more often than not, the dog only has to learn that it can go up once or twice, and then they respect the fact that it can and want to avoid that in the future, right? So they like it at the low level, they actually, seek it out and want it to happen. But then at the higher level, they're like, nah, I don't enjoy that so much, so I will avoid it. And I'm still happy to feel the lower level, and that gives us that tactile command where the dog can happily do it. So it looks like if you say to Fido, come, and he's like, nah, I'm still like going after that thing, we still would prefer to be on the long line. But then we go like, all right, well, here's level 2, right? And I'm still going to drag you in, and level 2 is going to turn off. And we will get to the point where there's a level, and it might be 1 or 2 clicks higher, where the dog goes, whoa, 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 I do want to turn that off. But you'll never stress the dog. He'll never be in conflict or shut down, because he knows exactly how to turn it off. So that's kind of the key criteria of using the e-collar as a recall, is that by the time the dog is motivated to turn it off and really wants it turned off, he knows exactly how to do that. That's the key criteria of that. And then that's why that it's easy for the dog. The learning is simple, and the dog will never be shut down or worried about wearing the e-collar, because he knows, like, I know how to turn that off. And ethically, like, we never want to be putting our dog into actual pain and discomfort where it can be avoided. So in order to keep them safe, the squirrels safe, and have the dog having this fulfilling life where he can run around and do all these kinds of things, and we know we can recall him, once or twice, we're probably going to have to show him that, hey, that level can increase, right? And then people tend to stay at that level once it increases. I say go back down, right? Because the dog knows it can, doesn't mean that it should every time. And so we can stick at that low level, whatever it is that you find is like happy for the dog to do it, right? One of the other things, like, with some e-collars, you can have the warning tone and before the stim. And so if you wanted to just avoid the stim altogether, you can do this exact same system with that, so that the dog feels the tone and goes, okay, that could lead to the stim if I don't turn around, right? But that's the effect of your command.